Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Leslie Holland's Dissertation Defense, the title of which is The Impact of COVID-19 on Student Enrollment, Funding, and Learning Gaps, a historical case study of Alamo Heights ISD and San Antonio ISD. And Leslie, we're so happy that you're here and getting ready to present your data and your rich findings, I'm sure, from what you learned through your research. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass this off to you. If everyone in the room could just mute their mic, so in case we have any extra sound or anything, so it'll be nice and quiet for Leslie to present. And with that, Leslie, I pass it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. MBK. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Leslie Holland, and I am very excited to present my dissertation research on the impact of COVID-19 on student enrollment, funding, and learning gaps, a historical case study of Alamo Heights Independent School District and San Antonio Independent School District from 2018 to 2024. This research is going to delve into the profound effects of the pandemic on two distinct school districts in San Antonio, Texas. To begin, let me set the stage. The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to education systems worldwide. While its impact was universal, the way it affected different communities varied significantly. My research focused on understanding these differential impacts within a local context, specifically examining how pre-existing disparities were amplified. The core problem addressed by this study is how the pandemic exacerbated existing disparities in education. We've long known about the divide between property wealthy and property poor districts. Alamo Heights Independent School District, a property wealthy district, and San Antonio ISD, a property poor district, serve as compelling case studies to examine this phenomenon. There was a critical need for a district-level comparative analysis to truly understand the nuances of these impacts, particularly how they affected enrollment, funding, academic performance, and teacher retention over time. The purpose of this dissertation was to analyze the historical trends in student enrollment, funding, and learning outcomes in Alamo Heights Independent School District and San Antonio Independent School District, specifically examining the period before, during, and after the COVID-19 pandemic. The significance of this study lies in its ability to highlight the long-term consequences of the pandemic on educational equity and to inform future policy decisions aimed at mitigating such disparities. My findings aim to provide actionable insight for policymakers, educators, and researchers to comprehend and address the pandemic's long-term effects on educational equity in Texas and beyond. My research was guided by 5 key research questions and their corresponding hypotheses, which you can see outlined on this slide. These questions cover, first, enrollment shifts. How did the pandemic impact student enrollment trends and their relation to funding and academic performance? Number 2, funding changes. How did enrollment fluctuations impact funding allocations? 3, learning gaps. What impact did COVID-19 have on student learning gaps and academic performance? Number 4, long-term outcomes. How have long-term educational outcomes, specifically college readiness, been affected? And 5, teacher pay and retention. How did COVID-19 impact teacher retention, salaries, and working conditions? These questions allowed for a comprehensive analysis of the pandemic's differential impact. My literature review explored several key themes that underpin this research. I looked at existing research on the impact of large-scale disruptions in education, the historical context of school finance in Texas, particularly the Robin Hood litigation and its ongoing effects, and the pre-existing achievement gaps that were already a concern before the pandemic. These themes provided the foundational understanding of the complexities within the Texas educational landscape. I also delved into studies on the digital divide, teacher attrition, and the role of socioeconomic status in educational outcomes, all of which provide crucial context for understanding my findings. For instance, the digital divide was a significant factor during remote learning, with students from low-income families disproportionately affected by unequal access to technology and internet connectivity. This review helped establish the parameters for my quantitative analysis, identifying gaps in the current research regarding district-level comparative impact. To frame this study, I drew on 3 leadership theories: transformational, servant, and adaptive leadership. Transformational leadership helps explain how district leaders could inspire staff and communities during uncertainty. Servant leadership focuses on ethical, student-centered decision-making, examining how districts prioritized equity and access to resources. Adaptive leadership highlighted how leaders respond to complex and rapidly changing conditions, such as fluctuating enrollment and funding. Together, these theories guide the interpretation of how leadership practices influence outcomes. This study was also grounded in the Jesuit values of cura personalis, magis, and men and women for others. Cura personalis, or care for the whole person, reminds us to consider the full range of student needs. Magis calls us to strive for excellence and push beyond the minimum, reflected in understanding how districts could have done more to support all students equally. And men and women for others speaks directly to examining how leadership decisions served or failed to serve those most impacted by systemic inequality. These values ensure the research remained focused on justice, equity, and the common good. So now let's move into the heart of the research, the methodology. This study employed a historical case study approach, which allowed for an in-depth exploration of how 2 demographically and economically distinct districts, Alamo Heights ISD and San Antonio ISD, were impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic over time. By focusing on the years 2018 through 2024, I was able to examine both pre-pandemic baselines and post-pandemic trends. To ensure objectivity and clarity, this study relied heavily on quantitative data drawn from publicly available sources. The aim was not just to track numbers, but to uncover patterns and relationships between enrollment shifts, funding allocations, academic performance, and teacher pay that reveal how systemic responses shaped educational equity and student success in each district. My data collection was robust, drawing primarily from publicly available information. I relied heavily on the Texas Education Administration, or the TEA, reports, including detailed financial data, student enrollment figures, and STAR, State of Texas Assessment of Readiness scores. We also gathered data on teacher pay scales and retention rates from district financial reports. These diverse data sources allowed for a multifaceted analysis of the pandemic's impact, providing a comprehensive data set for my comparative study. So to analyze this data meaningfully, I employed correlational and linear regression analyses. These methods were chosen to explore both the strength of relationships between the variables, such as funding and academic performance, and to identify trends over time, particularly during the pandemic years. Correlation helped reveal whether increases or decreases in enrollment were associated with changes in outcomes, with changes in standardized test scores or teacher pay, while regression analysis allowed for the prediction of outcomes based on year-over-year patterns. By applying these techniques to both Alamo Heights ISD and San Antonio ISD, the goal was to determine whether leadership response and resource allocation during COVID-19 had measurable impacts on student success, and if so, how those impacts differed across districts with contrasting socioeconomic profiles. Additionally, t-tests and ANOVA were used for cross-district comparison. Throughout this research, ethical considerations were paramount. I ensured that all data used was publicly available and aggregated to protect individual privacy. My analysis focused on systemic trends rather than individual performance, and I maintained academic integrity in all interpretations and presentations of the data. All data was anonymized, and no individual level data was collected. So this is model alignment with my research questions and hypotheses. This slide provides a concise overview of how each research question was addressed through specific models and variables. For instance, to investigate enrollment shifts, I used correlation analysis for research question 1. The hypothesis predicted an increase in Alamo Heights enrollment and a decrease in San Antonio ISD enrollment, and indeed I found a non-zero correlation supporting this. For funding changes in research question 2, linear regression was used, showing significant positive correlation. For learning gaps in research question 3, a combination of correlation and regression was used, with all predictors found to be significant. Teacher salary addressed in research question 4 was analyzed using descriptive trend analysis, consistently showing Alamo Heights salaries to be higher. Finally, for teacher retention in research question 5, multiple regression was employed, with salary and class size as predictors, both proving significant. The t-tests and ANOVA further solidified my understanding of cross-district differences over time. Now that I've reviewed the methodology and data analysis approach, let's turn to the results, where we begin to see the real-world impact of the pandemic on our 2 districts. I'll start by addressing research questions 1 and 2, which focus on 2 foundational elements of the study: how student enrollment shifted during the pandemic years, and how those changes influenced or were influenced by district funding. These areas are critical because they help set the stage for understanding broader academic and structural outcomes. Let's take a closer look at what my data revealed. This graph illustrates the enrollment trends in both Alamo Heights Independent School District and San Antonio Independent School District from 2018 to 2024, and the contrast is striking. Alamo Heights saw a modest but consistent increase in enrollment during and after the pandemic, while San Antonio ISD experienced a significant and steady decline. This divergence underscores one of the most critical dynamics of the pandemic's educational impact. Families with greater financial stability often had the flexibility to seek out schools they perceived as safe, more adaptable, or better resourced, while families in less affluent communities faced more limited options. These trends suggest that existing inequities were not only exposed during the pandemic, but may have deepened as a result. My correlation analysis found a strong positive correlation for Alamo Heights Independent School District and a negative correlation for San Antonio Independent School District, supporting hypothesis 1A and 1B. Regarding funding, my linear regression model confirmed a strong relationship between enrollment and funding for both districts. As you can see on the table, for Alamo Heights ISD, the intercept was $13,445, and the enrollment coefficient was a positive 0.281, with a high R squared of 0.85. and a p-value less than 0.01, indicating a very strong and significant relationship. For San Antonio ISD, the intercept was $9,842, and the enrollment coefficient was a positive 0.193, with an R-squared of 0.72 and a p-value less than 0.05, also significant. While both districts' funding is tied to enrollment, the coefficients suggest that Alamo Heights received a higher per-student allocation or had a more favorable funding structure, which is often linked to property value and local tax bases. This supports hypothesis 2A and 2B, showing that enrollment significantly predicted funding in both districts, but with a stronger effect in Alamo Heights ISD. Moving on to research question 3, the learning gaps. This section is particularly critical as it addressed the academic consequences of the pandemic. My analysis of STAR scores revealed significant disparities in how students in Alamo Heights and San Antonio ISDs were able to maintain or recover their academic progress. These gaps are not merely statistical differences. They represent real challenges in student learning and development. The data suggests that factors such as access to consistent remote learning environments, parental support, and supplemental educational resources played a substantial role in mitigating or exacerbating learning loss. While the pandemic impacted all students, the pre-existing socioeconomic disparities meant that students in San Antonio ISD faced compounded challenges in accessing the necessary support to bridge these gaps effectively. This table represents the STAR performance data, specifically the percentage of students meeting grade level in reading and math for both districts from 2018 to 2024. As you can see, there was a dip in scores for both districts in 2020 to 2021, which was the first full academic year impacted by the pandemic. Please note that during the first pandemic year, STAR tests were paused. Alamo Heights consistently maintained higher percentages of students meeting grade level compared to San Antonio ISD. For example, in 23-24, Alamo Heights had 87% of students meeting grade level in reading and 89% in math, while San Antonio ISD had 53% and 57% respectively. This persistent gap underscores the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on learning outcomes in property-poor districts, likely due to the disparities in access to technology, broadband, and other crucial learning resources during remote learning. My regression analysis found that funding, device access, and broadband access were all significant predictors of STAR scores, supporting hypothesis 3A and 3B. Now let's examine research questions 4 and 5, long-term outcomes, specifically teacher pay and retention. Beyond student performance, the stability of the teaching workforce is a critical indicator of a district's health and its capacity to deliver quality education. My findings in this section highlight how the pandemic, coupled with existing financial disparities, influenced the ability of these districts to attract and retain their educators. This directly impacts continuity of instruction and the overall learning environment for the students. I'll look at average salaries and then delve into the broader picture of teacher movement between districts. This table illustrates the average teacher salaries at Alamo Heights ISD versus San Antonio ISD. The data clearly shows that Alamo Heights consistently offered higher salaries than SAISD throughout the study period. For instance, in the 23-24 school year, Alamo Heights' average salary was $62,460 per year, compared to San Antonio ISD's $56,307. This difference is significant as competitive salaries are crucial for attracting and retaining high-quality educators, especially in challenging times. The consistent difference supports hypothesis 4A, indicating stronger long-term outcomes for Alamo Heights in terms of teacher compensation. This slide depicts the percentage of teachers that did not return each year in Alamo Heights and San Antonio ISD. It is worth noting that in the 2019-2020 school year, the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, Alamo Heights experienced its highest attrition rates in almost 20 years, coming up to just a little above 20%. In the 2022-2023 and 2023-2024 school years, San Antonio ISD was forced to close a total of 9 campuses across its district, which also impacted retention. To understand the factors influencing these trends, I conducted a multiple linear regression analysis, which I will detail on my next slide. To predict teacher retention based on salary and working conditions, I used a multiple linear regression model. The independent variables were average teacher salary and average class size, and the dependent variable was the teacher retention rate, or the percent of teachers returning each year. My analysis revealed that both salary and class size were significant predictors of teacher retention. Salary was a strong positive indicator, meaning higher salaries were associated with greater retention. Class size was a significant negative predictor, indicating that smaller class sizes are also linked to higher retention. The model explained 69% of the variance in teacher retention. This finding is critical because teacher stability and experience are directly linked to student success. The disparities in teacher compensation and working districts between these districts likely contribute to a higher attrition rate in San Antonio ISD, further impacting the learning environment for its students and thus supporting hypothesis 5A and 5B. College readiness as determined by TSI scores. So this slide shows college readiness trends as measured by TSI, or the Texas Success Initiative scores, for Alamo Heights and San Antonio ISD from 2018 to 2024. TSI scores help determine whether students are prepared for college-level coursework without needing remediation. Alamo Heights ISD consistently outperforms San Antonio ISD with readiness rates around 66% in the most recent years. While there was a dip during the pandemic years from 2020 to 2022, Alamo Heights rebounded quickly. In contrast, San Antonio ISD college readiness rates remained much lower, typically between 35 and 40%, with only modest improvement over time. This persistent gap reflects broader systemic disparities in access to academic supports and resources, gaps that were only intensified by the pandemic, which supports hypothesis 4A and 4B. With the results in view, we can now move into discussion, where I interpret what these findings truly mean in a broader educational and policy context. The evidence from this study makes one thing clear. The COVID-19 pandemic did not create new inequities. It magnified the ones that already existed. The sharp contrasts between Alamo Heights ISD and San Antonio ISD in enrollment trends, in funding, and in student achievement and teacher retention are not coincidental. They are the result of a long-standing structural issue in public education: the reliance on local property values to determine school funding. This model inherently advantages wealthier districts and leaves lower income communities at a systemic disadvantage, an imbalance that became even more pronounced under the pressures of the pandemic. These findings have serious implications, highlighting the urgent need for state-level funding reform that ensures all students, regardless of zip code, have equitable access to resources and opportunities. So what are my proposed solutions? Based on these findings, I propose several solutions to foster greater equity in Texas. Number one, equitable and stable state funding reform. Modify the foundation school program to include stability mechanisms and greater weights for disadvantaged students, reducing the reliance on volatile property taxes and attendance. Number two, statewide digital equity and targeted learning gap interventions. Implement a sustainable one-to-one device-to-student ratio, universal affordable broadband, and evidence-based high-impact tutoring like the program supported in Texas House Bill 4545. Number three, strengthening teacher retention, recruitment, and support in high-need areas. Offer targeted financial incentives such as loan forgiveness, improved working conditions, and equitably implement programs such as the teacher incentive allotment in high poverty schools. And finally, fostering enrollment stability through proactive community engagement and responsive programming. Support districts in developing enrollment management strategies, specialized academic programs, and partnerships with local organizations for wraparound services. These solutions are directly informed by my empirical findings and are supported by broader educational research. These findings have important implications for educational leadership at all levels. District leaders need to be strong advocates for fair and equitable funding policies, but it is just as crucial that they use the resources they have strategically, focusing on the specific needs of their most vulnerable students. At the state level, leaders have a responsibility to push for meaningful reform that disconnects school funding from local property wealth, which is a key barrier to equal opportunity. This study reinforces the critical importance of equity-centered leadership and the need for adaptive leadership to navigate complex and ambiguous crises. Effective leadership means more than managing systems. It requires a genuine commitment to equity, the courage to challenge long-standing inequalities, and a clear vision to create schools that serve every student fairly. This study opens up several avenues for future research. Further qualitative studies could explore the lived experiences of students, teachers, and administrators in both types of districts during and after the pandemic. Longitudinal studies could track the long-term academic and socio-emotional outcomes of students, particularly those who experience significant learning losses. Additionally, research into the effectiveness of specific interventions aimed at closing the learning gaps in under-resourced districts would be invaluable. Comparative studies in other Texas districts or investigations into alternative funding. These models could further build upon these findings. In summary, my dissertation provides compelling evidence of how the COVID-19 pandemic exposed and exacerbated deep-seated inequalities within the Texas public education system. This comparative analysis of Alamo Heights ISD and San Antonio ISD underscores the urgent need for policy changes that move beyond a reliance on local property taxes for school funding. My hope is that this research contributes to a broader conversation about educational equity and inspires actionable solutions to ensure all students, regardless of zip code, have access to high-quality innovation. This work aligns with my commitment, informed by the Jesuit values, to advocate for justice and ensure all students can receive and achieve their full potential. At this time, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to my dissertation committee, to Dr. Polito, to Dr. V, for their invaluable guidance and support throughout this journey. I also want to thank my family. I'm sorry, give me a minute, I'm going to get emotional. I also want to thank my family, especially my father and my children, for all their love and support these past 15 years, if I count undergrad and master's and now my doctorate. To all my friends, to all my teaching colleagues, my administration, and my students for their unwavering encouragement. And finally, thank you to the Texas Education Agency for making all the data available that made this research possible, to the San Antonio City Council, who I will be speaking to within the next month or two, to Alamo Heights ISD, San Antonio ISD, and of course, to Somerset Academies of Texas for their support throughout this journey. Thank you for your, I don't know why it's not going back. Thank you for your attention, and I'm now happy to take any questions you may have.
Dr. Polito and Dr. V, we'd love to hear you ask some questions and facilitate the discussion for us.
Sure. I'll get us started if you don't mind. Leslie, good morning, and good
Good
morning to
morning.
all our guests. It has been such a pleasure to work with you these past few years as your chair and to watch you develop as a human and a scholar and a researcher. I often tell students, take a moment to look back to where you were just a couple of years ago and then to enjoy where you are today. Your research is very important and it's brought us a lot of insight. My question for you this morning, it's probably not in your data, and you very passionately spoke about the changes that we need. In hindsight, do you think there's anything that a district like San Antonio ISD could have done during COVID or a similar challenging period, or is a district like that really set up to fail by the lack of resources?
Unfortunately, and I think those of us who teach in San Antonio, Texas would probably agree with my assessment. Because of the way the school system is designed in San Antonio, mostly due to what we call redlining from the 1930s and 1940s, districts like San Antonio ISD are unfortunately potentially set up for failure in these kind of circumstances. During COVID-19, when we all had to switch to remote learning, there were plenty of news stories going around where students in San Antonio ISD, in Edgewood ISD, another poverty poor district, Harlandale ISD, a third poverty poor district, these students were setting up camp basically in their parking lots of their schools in order to access internet to get their work done. Or these schools were relying strictly on paper packets that students would have to come pick up on Monday and turn back in the following Monday. And that's not really a good learning model. You can't just hand a packet of paper to a student without teacher support and expect that student to learn. And I think the STAR scores we've seen since the pandemic show that failure. Do I fault San Antonio ISD? Not at all. I fault a lot of the TEA, Texas Education Agency, for how they implement. I fault a lot of how, again, funding is designated into San Antonio. In Alamo Heights, they get 90% of their funding from local taxes. San Antonio ISD is almost the flip of that. They rely so much on government funding as opposed to local funding. So I think districts, unfortunately, are set up for failure. And that is something that I am hoping to address with City Council when I get to speak to them. It'll either be in August or September.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm very proud to hear that you're carrying forward your advocacy.
I actually have a question that kind of piggybacks on that. When you were choosing your samples for the comparison of two districts, San Antonio is significantly larger than at Alamo Heights. Did you consider when you were working or deciding which districts to choose? Alamo Heights kind of seems pretty obvious, as we know it's a fairly wealthy property wealth district. Picking a district that was more comparable in size, like Edgewood or Harlandale, or did you consider, if you were going to include San Antonio, to include another comparatively large district like Northeast or North Side? So what was
So,
your thinking in terms of your demographic selections?
so in regards to that, when I first started putting things together for my research, I originally had 5 districts that I was going to look at. I was going to look at San Antonio and Edgewood. I was going to look at North Side, Northeast, and then Alamo Heights. And so that would have given kind of a broader, here's the very wealthy district. Here are 2 not so wealthy, but not so poor districts. And then here are the very poor districts that could be assessed. Time constraints actually kind of kicked my butt because trying to take on 5 districts with that many schools between at least 4 of those districts, with Alamo Heights only having 5 schools, it's a little smaller district. We had Alamo Heights that at one time, or excuse me, we had San Antonio that at one time had 114 schools, is now down to something like 95 because of school closures due to enrollment. Edgewood ISD with almost the same amount of schools, and the Northeast and North Side with a lot of schools as well. It just probably would have taken me another 2 years to get all the information together. At some point, I would like to go back and maybe do a smaller comparison between all 5 of these districts that I had originally chosen, just to see, what the pandemic did to other districts within San Antonio as well.
Okay. Yeah, that makes total sense.
Let's go ahead and open it up for any questions that others may have. Just unmute yourself and feel free to ask Leslie a question. Dr. Miller.
Leslie knows she wouldn't get out of this without something from me, right?
I was waiting for you, sir.
Well, okay. Statistical mumbo jumbo aside, and all the fog of COVID and everything else, and I realize this is overly simplistic because we're dealing with layers of complexity here. Give me a clear-eyed, here's the one thing I want to see happen with schools related to this challenge. As you cut through all the crap and everything else, just you're in a 3-story building, so the elevator speech is very short.
If I had to choose one thing I would like to see come out of all of this, it would be to have that funding reform. I would very much like to be able to walk into city council and be able to present my findings and have them say, how are we going to fix this? And me be able to present my findings that say, to do equitable funding, we need to have a model across the board that is not reliant on property taxes for funding. So I don't know how it's done in other states, but in Texas, the funding that goes to school is reliant on your property taxes. So in Alamo Heights, I've got a 3-bedroom, 2-story house that's 3,000 square feet that's bringing in $7,000 worth of property taxes for the school. I have the same house, the exact same square footage in San Antonio ISD that's only bringing in $1,900 in property taxes that goes to the school. There is a huge disparity. There needs to be a better model, and that is the one thing I really want out of all this, because without that equitable funding, you have schools that are using 20 and 30-year-old textbooks that are getting the same education as a school that can get new textbooks every single year. There has to be a better funding model, and that's what I want.
And just to be a bit of a Cro-Magnon, or not a Cro-Magnon, a curmudgeon for you, is funding the solution, because we see anecdotally examples all over the country where copious amounts of money are poured into schools and they're miserable, and others are a little more bootstrapped and the kids are thriving. So is there maybe some issues around leadership and governance that comes into play here?
Oh, absolutely. There needs to be an overhaul of administration. There needs to be an overhaul of the Texas Education Agency in general. It is not just about the funding, but the funding plays a large part when you've got people managing the funding that don't actually come into the classrooms and the schools to see what's going on.
There you go. It's still a people problem.
Yes, absolutely.
Money just becomes an excuse in many cases.
Mhm.
Could we argue in some respect this is kind of a Matthew effect
Mhm.
that we're seeing?
Yes.
Okay, can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
You cut out on me, so.
Sorry, can you elaborate a little bit more on that? The idea that, that those who have more will be given, those who have less will be given, sort of thing. In terms of looking at funding and access, because I remember during COVID as well having that same issue where you had students that were, having, camps and parking lots and going to Starbucks to be able to access wireless,
Right.
have to get the wireless access and all that. I remember even having one student who she had three younger brothers and sisters, and she was having to sit and piggyback while
Yes.
her parents were working online as well, trying,
Yep.
to maintain their jobs, and
And
something had to give because everybody couldn't be online all at once. And this was
no, they
for
couldn't.
a comparatively well-resourced family.
Right. And a lot of the times it wasn't just what the families had, it was what they could get. So one of the things I encountered in my research was in Alamo Heights at the start of the pandemic. Alamo Heights the parents of the schools and the school board and everything went around to local Alamo Heights businesses and said, hey, can you help us ensure that all of our kids have laptops, that all of our kids have broadband, that all of our kids have resources? And so when the schools had to close down after spring break, students within the Alamo Heights School District, and we're talking about 5,000, close to 5,000 students, every student went home with a laptop, a router, textbooks, and every resource they would need to finish out the school year. The school I teach in, the schools that I did in San Antonio ISD, they did not have that. We were lucky to be able to give a family one laptop, and that family may have 5 children, so who gets priority? And a lot of the time it wasn't the junior or senior student that was trying to graduate. It was the younger student that got the resource. And so, when you see Alamo Heights has $15,000 of revenue per student, and a school like San Antonio ISD has $9,000 per student, even though San Antonio ISD has the more students and more schools, they're getting a lot of money, yes, but it's being dispersed in a larger cycle than in Alamo Heights. Alamo Heights may get $450 million, but they've only got to divide that up between 5 schools and 5,000 students. San Antonio ISD may get the same amount of money, but now they've got to divide it up between 47,000 students and 95 campuses. So they could get more money, but that doesn't necessarily solve the problem. If that makes sense.
I'll ask one question and others, if you have questions, please pop in too. But so what I want to ask Leslie is, what's next now? You have all this data, you have all this information. You're sitting here in the summer. What are you thinking for what's next?
So what's next for me is I have, of course, come up with a whole list of proposed solutions. I have drafted a grant proposal for San Antonio ISD. And I am not on the date docket yet, but I am planning to speak with city council, and we just got a new mayor, so it's getting her schedule, synced up with everybody else. But my plan is to speak with city council either in late August or mid-September to present my findings, to let them know what's going on, and here are my proposed solutions. Here's a grant proposal that could be used. And then from there, I'm hopeful that I can get up into Austin, into the governor's office, and to sit down. I would love to sit down with Mike Morath, who is the head of our Texas Education Agency. I don't know that he'd like to sit down with me, but I would most definitely like to sit down with him and show him, because I don't know that he understands what's happening in some of the cities since COVID-19. So for me, that's the next steps. And then after that, who knows, maybe I will go back and do some more research on other districts and how they compared to throughout the pandemic years as well. I obviously want to know more, so.
Yes, it sounds like a passion. So that's fantastic. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Dr. Polito so she can lead us through the final bits of this dissertation defense. And so thank you. Thanks, Leslie.
Thank you.
Leslie, one thing I've been thinking about with you is whether you might seek an opportunity to publish this just to, to make it wider spread knowledge. And then, of course, that adds some gravitas to when, you go to see the governor, right? Or
Yes.
the TEA. So yes, I'm happy to support you in that process as
Awesome.
well. Yeah. I want to make sure we hear from everyone. Are there any other questions or comments to be had?
My name is Gordon. I just want to ask one question, just to make sure that I understand correctly the information you've presented. Are you saying that the capability or success of an educational facility, in your research, I'm struggling with the chicken or the egg question. Is the school successful because of the economic status of the area around it, or is the economic status of the area around it based on the success of the school? I'm curious to know if in your course of research, if you were able to uncover any indicators as to that relationship.
So thank you for that question. Some of the indicators, a lot of it has to do with the geographical location again. So I don't personally think that a school is successful based on the amount of money they get. A school is successful based on how students learn, how teachers teach. Does it help to have money? Absolutely. But you could also walk into a excuse me, you could also walk into a rural 2-room schoolhouse anywhere in the United States probably and see students that are happily learning despite not having the highest technology or the best curriculum or any of that. I think it is a lot of that is dependent on how teachers approach children in education. I could go teach at the richest school district in the United States, but if I don't teach in a manner in which my students can learn, there's no success. And that has nothing to do with money. You could give me all the money in the world, but if I don't understand how to teach in a way that students learn, it's not going to do me any good. Conversely, if you're not paying me anything, but I'm working in a school where students are learning and enjoying and understanding what it is that they need to understand, and they are growing, then I'm successful without the funding. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
So based on what you're saying, it sounds like you're expressing that by breaking geographical barriers, you're making expert teachers available to students outside of their geography and making, allowing students to have access to education that's outside of their geography, that's the key to success.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I had a quick question, if that's
Sure.
okay. What was the most rewarding thing that you achieved and learned during this whole process? And what was the most difficult part of this whole process?
Oh, my daughter, everybody. She asks the tough questions. Okay, I'm sorry. So the most rewarding thing out of all of this, is that what you were saying?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I think the most rewarding thing out of all of this for me is being able to allow my students and my children to see that there is no age limit on learning. There is no point in time when you should say, okay, I'm too old to learn. I'm too old to do anything else. And I think the most rewarding part of this entire journey is I didn't even start my college journey until I was 37 years old. And so to go through undergrad and my master's program back to back, and then I took 3 years off before I came into my doctoral program. And I think the most rewarding thing for me is going to be going back into school this year and having students that I've known since 6th and 7th grade look at me and go, hey, Dr. Holland, or, how did you do? And, because they do. My students and my kids both. I mean, they always ask me. They always want to know. And I think by showing that you can still learn, that you can still find out new things as you grow older, for my own children and for my students, is something that I hope they will carry with them the rest of their lives, that there's never a time when you stop learning. The most difficult, did you say the most difficult, or what was the second part of that one, Joe?
The most challenging part
Math.
of this whole experience.
Math. Statistics, math, anything to do with numbers.
But you're so good at it.
I am good at business math. When you start mixing your letters with my numbers, we have a problem. No, the most challenging part really, I mean, it really was that statistics chapter. The actual doing all the data analysis to me was the most challenging. But also, again, part of the most rewarding, because I did it. I did it and I got through it. And so both challenging and rewarding at the same time.
I would say you didn't just get through it with the math. You produced some of the cleanest, most focused data that I've seen, not just in student work, but in early researcher work. I certainly wasn't someone who was able to get such clean results in their quantitative study at the doctoral level. So I just want to point out the obvious, which is that, you know, you worked incredibly hard, and representation matters, right? I
Yes.
also went to get my doctorate. I went when I was 50. So, you know, people are like, you're too old. Why would you do that? And you're like, why would I not? Right. So I think when people see the work that you've done, they'll realize that your determination has got you to a really good place.
Thank you. I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. Do we have other questions? Other children? I don't know. Let's see.
I
No,
have one.
just the one child.
Okay,
The
there
other
you
child's
go.
still asleep.
Fair
Looking
enough.
at your policy recommendations,
Mhm.
and especially given the contentiousness that school funding always, brings up. I mean, Texas has been in litigation for what, 40, 50 years now,
Yeah, at least.
in developing some kind of funding formula. And Texas is only one state. I know California has a very, very long history of funding inequity problems as well, and I'm sure it's probably all over the country. Have you looked at, and I know that this was not your original focus because you were looking at district level comparisons, looking at also disaggregation by race, ethnicity. Because again, we see, especially in a lot of property poor districts, tend to be much more larger concentrations of racial ethnic minorities, African American, Mexican American, American Indian, and um, oftentimes school funding gets tied up with those issues in terms of educational equity for ethnic minorities as well. And is there a way, do you think, you could expand your research at some point to address some of those concerns?
Absolutely. And it was something my original template, I guess you could say, um, was going to address those concerns. Again, because of time, I did not get into that, but I absolutely feel like there needs to be an extension of my research into that area, and that may be something I plan to do later on down the line.
Maybe find a collaborator.
Yes. Are you
Well,
volunteering?
well, considering what my dissertation was looking at,
Yes,
I think
exactly. Yes.
it would
Get
be a
you
good
me and
match.
Dr. Obifuna. We'll be good.
Sounds great.
All right. Well, now we got a work cut out for us. Any other questions at all, or comments for us?
Yes, I'd like to ask one. Explain the redlining and inequities in educational financing. What is your feelings about reducing administrative overhead and funneling that money down to the student level, as well as how do we deal with that inequity in charter schools and parochial schools, because we're all in the same district. Almost all the charter schools and parochial schools in the San Antonio geographical area, which is quite a few cities, are all basically in the SAISD area. Low property values, low income, food scarcity, etc. how do you propose that we could present this to city council and state government to have better equity among the students and the different campuses around the city?
So that's my father, everybody, my dad. And he knows, he's heard me complain about just those very things he's asking about. And so my teaching career actually started at a Catholic school in San Antonio on the outskirts of the SAISD Edgewood border, Holy Cross of San Antonio. And redlining was a practice. If you are not familiar with redlining was a practice prior to civil rights, where cities would say minorities could not live past certain areas, certain borders. San Antonio ISD, Edgewood ISD, Harlandale ISD, they are all part of the redlining idea. They are minority heavy districts, Latino and African American in nature for the most part. And because of the redlining in that time, the funding to the schools that were opened for them was nowhere near what the funding was for the white schools of Alamo Heights, Northeast ISD, Northside ISD, and those kind of schools. And it's still a challenge today. Now, I will say that while I was finishing up my dissertation, the state of Texas did pass a, Dr. V, correct me if I'm wrong, it is a school voucher bill, school voucher program that
Yes.
that allegedly will give up to $10,000 to families within a specific economic, so what I'm looking for, within a certain economic holding, that those parents can then send their student to a private or charter school or another school not in their district. Now, upon that happening, Northside ISD, which is one of our wealthier districts, not an Alamo Heights level of wealth, but wealthier than SAISD, Northside ISD came out just a couple of weeks ago and announced that they are now considering themselves a open district, meaning they will be schools of choice, meaning if you do not reside in the Northside ISD borders, you are going to be allowed to enroll or put your child on a waiting list to enroll in a Northside ISD, in a Northside ISD district. With charter schools, which is where I teach in a charter school. We are a school of choice, so you can come to us. Now, with a lot of charter schools, we don't have a bus service, so you have to find your own way to us. And a lot of charter schools are different types of schools. My school is what they call a SLAM Academy. And so sports, leadership, and
Management.
sports leadership and management. Well, there was something else and I always forget what it is. But anyway, but we have AP programs. We have a fantastic dual credit program where we have seen students graduate from college prior to high school graduation with their associate's degrees. There are some charter schools that focus heavily on theater or the arts. We have the School of the Performing Arts in the Northeast ISD. We have magnet schools. So there are all these different ways that parents can use these school voucher funds to send their child to a school where they choose to send them. Now, does this do anything for these communities? It could. The Catholic school communities are now going to probably see an influx because this money could help some parents send their child to Catholic school. Now, I will say that there are a lot of Catholic schools where $10,000 a year is not going to do a whole lot to pay your tuition. You cannot go to one of the large Catholic schools because that's like $30,000, $40,000 a year. But I feel that a lot of the generational poverty, as opposed to generational wealth, you can go into some of these communities and they don't see themselves as being generationally impoverished. That is their family home. That is their family community. And when I taught in this West Side community for 2 years, I felt so much community spirit and so much family spirit within these communities than I ever felt when my children went to Northeast ISD schools. I never felt that community in this wealthier school district that I felt in what we considered the poorer school districts. They may be poorer economically, but that doesn't mean that they are poorer community-wise, if that makes sense to everybody. But I think in the long run, it's going to take a complete overhaul of the government, of the education agency, of administrations, of school boards. And I don't unfortunately see anytime soon that the entire city of San Antonio is going to sit down and say, hey, let's have a discussion on how we can make everything equitable. Because even now, there are superintendents throughout the city that are fighting against the school vouchers, that are fighting against charter schools. And so nobody wants to be on the same page. Nobody's even trying to get on the same page. Do they all need to be on the same page? Yes, at some point. But I don't know that that's going to happen in the next 1 to 2 years.
I think also one of the concerns that you mentioned, just to add a little bit more information on the school voucher system, is that when students use these vouchers and move to a different school or a private school or whatnot, that money that would be allotted to that school district or to that school from the state goes with them. So
Mhm.
that the fear is that the voucher system could decimate public school districts because you're going to have an influx of students going to other districts or going to private schools or charter schools. And so we are already, financially impoverished districts are going to become even more impoverished with their financial base being gutted. The other big concern that I know politically had come up was that the voucher system, kind of like what you were talking about, Leslie,
Mhm.
that it disrupts communities, but it's also the people that are going to benefit the most from it are more likely going to be wealthier families who now are basically getting a $10,000 scholarship to be able to send their kids to a private school that they can afford to go anyway. So
Right.
this is just a way of just transferring more public school funds into a private school system. And
Yeah.
the biggest concern is that the money theoretically that this would help a poorer family from a poor, maybe a failing school district will be able to say, oh, good, we can now go to a private school. Said, no, you can't. Not
Mm.
necessarily if you can't afford the
Right.
tuition. And if you go to a private school, there's no guarantee that private school is going to accept you because as a private school, they don't have to. And what if you have a
Exactly.
child that has special needs?
That's the other
That
issue.
private schools don't have the federal mandate that require that you have to provide services for them.
That is
So you
exactly.
see even families that might have challenges and different financial as well as educational challenges, the voucher system isn't necessarily going to fix that. So the big concern is this just another example of wealth transferring? But in this case, now using the public school system to allow wealthier families easier access to what they can already afford.
Mhm.
Other questions?
I think I just had one. I hope it's a
Sure.
simple question. All
Oh,
right,
here.
Mrs. Holland here. Is there anything in the literature that you found was inconsistent with your findings?
Um, so due to the nature of me taking everything from prior and during and after COVID, there was not a whole lot of literature yet on the impacts of COVID-19 on funding and allocation of funds or things like that. Um, most of the literature that I reviewed went in the same direction I did. There were maybe one or two that looked more at um, teacher resource, not teacher resource, but teacher support. And a lot of the research went in a socio-emotional direction rather than in a funding and resource support direction. And honestly, at one point I thought, oh, maybe I'll examine the socio-emotional because, our school had such a good socio-emotional SEL program going on during that time. But again, because there was so little literature on it, I decided to just move in the direction that I finally did. I'm hopeful that in the future there will be more literature because I would love to see what other people think.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Just
Other
one quick
questions?
final, one quick follow-up to that, Leslie.
Mhm.
Again, this is just totally your own judgment here. Do you think that what you looked at that COVID did was it amplified stuff that was already there that maybe wasn't quite as visible? I've seen that in disaster work I got involved in Illinois. I didn't create it, but I got involved in it.
Right. No,
For those who are thinking Jeff created a disaster,
no, I absolutely do.
that it was an amplifier as much as a
Absolutely.
catalyst.
Absolutely. These disparities, this inequity, all of this, these learning gaps, they were there prior to COVID-19. But what happened during COVID-19 just exacerbated the problem. It amplified what was happening. It made people actually stop and look. And you cannot blame COVID because the problems were there before COVID. COVID just showed us that, oh, maybe we need to pay more attention to what's causing the issue. So I hope that answers.
Yeah, no, I wanted to hear your take on, was COVID almost more of an amplifier than a
Yes,
catalyst?
absolutely.
Yeah, an amplifier, and I think you did such a good job of bracketing. You could have chosen any point in time, but by bracketing these COVID years, like you said, it just sort of gave us a window into something that those of you with the boots on the ground are well aware of, but the rest of us could really conceptualize it based on before and after. So
Right.
I think that was a really nice way that you spun that research.
Thank you.
Yeah, other questions?
One thing I noticed with your, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
One thing I noticed with your results and your presentation really demonstrated that was that, as everyone's been saying, COVID just seemed to amplify the disparities. But in looking at the results on almost every dimension that you looked at, it kind of seemed like Alamo Heights just kept plugging along, a little bump in the road, but no big deal. Whereas San Antonio, it was a train wreck.
Oh, absolutely.
And did you find were you surprised by that? Two, did you anticipate the train wreck to be as significant as it was for San Antonio when you were doing your
So
data analysis?
So I actually was not surprised by Alamo Heights, honestly, because those of us who live in San Antonio, we know Alamo Heights has a history of just being that kind of, oh, okay, bump of the road, everything's fine. We're just going to keep plugging along kind of deal. And while I expected San Antonio to have some issues, I was, like you said, I was not expecting the train wreck that I encountered as I was looking at the results. And a lot of the times it made me incredibly angry, that so much happened to San Antonio ISD, or that so much showed up that was already happening but was only made worse by the pandemic itself and by the inability to support everybody equally across the board. Yeah, Alamo Heights didn't surprise me at all. I had no, you know, reservations going into this that I was going to find out anything shocking about Alamo Heights. And of course, we all follow with San Antonio ISD that has had to be closing down schools, and it's one of the oldest districts in the city. And, to have to go down from 115 schools to now 93 or 94 with a possible another 4 closing this coming year. Yeah, it was a big shock to me to see how much COVID had exacerbated the ongoing issues within San Antonio.
I'm curious now it's like kind of energize this to reproduce this research, but look at another large urban district like Northside,
Oh, absolutely.
because the sense was that Northside handled the pandemic much, much better than San Antonio. And given that Northside is like the third largest school district in the state, I mean, we're talking a huge district
Mm-hmm.
and pretty wide socioeconomic differences as well
Yes.
across the district to see what was it that Northside did that made it that they weathered the
Better.
pandemic so much better than SAISD. And I
Right.
suspect it's not just money. I mean, money is certain because Northside certainly is a wealthier district than San Antonio.
Right.
But given that
But what
it's
else was
even
there?
larger than San Antonio, what else? What else? Maybe it's one of those that the district was just so big that they just were able to compensate with resources
Yeah,
that San Antonio just couldn't show. Or to look at another large district like Houston or
right,
Dallas. Because
right.
San Antonio is kind of weird in that the city is not a unitary school district. That we've got
Right.
what, like 20 different districts across the
20,
region,
yeah, there's
whereas
20
Houston
regions.
ISD is the entire school, the entire
Right,
city, just
right.
about.
Yeah.
So it would be really interesting to look at sort of a different demographic picture from that.
Leslie, just a word
So,
about
but
the
that's
note I just posted.
Yes, sir.
Phyllis did her dissertation around essentially coming out of the pandemic with the
Mm-hmm.
Chicago Archdiocese schools.
Okay. Yes, I see
And
that.
they,
Okay.
and in the media, they put Chicago public to shame because they were so successful in coming out of it.
That's Jurek. Okay.
Again, if that's kind of where you're doing your future
Yes.
learning.
Yes. Perfect. Thank you.
All right, this is your opportunity if you want to write anything in the chat to Leslie before we say a grateful goodbye to those of you who are not myself or Dr. Villarreal or Leslie.
Thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate it. Like I said, I have two childhood friends here, Matt and Gordon. Gordon, whom I've known since we were 11 and 12, and Matt
Oh,
known since middle school. So I definitely appreciate them being here, and my colleagues from my school as well. So, and Dr. Miller, thank you.
yeah, and this generated so much interest and excitement. That's really a testament to your work and your energy.
Yes.
Oh, look at all these chats.
know,
The comments
I
are
love it.
coming in. Oh.
I love it. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, again, the part that Leslie at least has been waiting for is about to happen, where we have a further discussion about the results of the defense. So I will say goodbye again to those of us who are not the three of us. And I'm sure she'll be in touch soon.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you.
Sorry. That's awesome. So you're all set with, I'll just leave. And I think your co-host, you got that. So you're all good.
Yes, we should be absolutely fine. And we have our
Let me get Dad
documentation
logged
and
on.
also thank you so much for guiding us through.
Oh,
Hold
you're
on, I'll be right
welcome.
back.
I'm just stopping the recording.